Imagine building a legacy over a lifetime, decades of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice. Now picture that legacy being handed over to charitable causes instead of your own children. How would you feel? Betrayed? Heartbroken? Or would you understand the bigger picture? This is the real story behind one of Hollywood's most profound inheritance battles. Stay tuned, because the twists and turns of this family's story are about to shock you. Going to miss you. These words, spoken with a tenderness that only grief can evoke, mark the beginning of a heartbreaking and life-altering journey for the Reiner family. When Rob Reiner, a beloved figure in Hollywood and beyond, passed away, the world mourned with them. But the pain for his family didn't end with the funeral. It only deepened, growing colder and more intimate, as the family was thrust into a whirlwind of unresolved emotions and unexpected betrayals. The true weight of the loss hit hard when the will was finally read. Roy and Jake, Rob's children, stood in shock, blindsided by a decision that would forever alter their relationship with their father's legacy. They had expected, like many children in their position, that their parents' fortune, a vast $200 million amassed over decades of tireless work, a reputation built through love, hard-won success, and a deeply ingrained legacy, would be passed down to them. But the truth was far different. Nearly the entire fortune had been allocated to charitable foundations, leaving the children with nothing. This decision, as deliberate and calculated as it was, left Roy and Jake reeling. It wasn't simply a financial blow, it was a profound emotional wound that cut deep into their sense of identity. In that moment, grief twisted into something darker. Shock rapidly gave way to anger, as the siblings realized that the wealth their father had spent a lifetime building wasn't being handed down to them, his own flesh and blood. Instead, it was being directed toward public causes, charities and organizations that Rob had long supported and believed in. The idea that their inheritance, something that could have provided them with the security and future they had always imagined, was being diverted to a higher cause, felt like a betrayal. It was as if the very essence of their family's bond was being ripped apart. Rob's legacy, once thought to be their inheritance, now felt distant and disconnected. The wealth once associated with family history no longer held the same meaning. For Jake and Roy, the decision wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing their place in the family's story. Their identities, intertwined with their father's legacy, felt erased. Jake, in particular, struggled with this deeply. His reaction wasn't born from a desire for greed, but from the emotional devastation of feeling discarded. It wasn't the loss of the fortune that hurt him, it was the overwhelming feeling of being forgotten. He felt as though the world mattered more to his parents than their own children. The wealth that Rob had built, the product of decades of dedication, was being used for causes that, while noble, did not include them. Jake's frustration reached a boiling point, and he lashed out at the idea that his parents had chosen to support the world over their own family. He struggled with the idea that their love, their care, had been transferred to public institutions instead of being kept within the family. It wasn't just about the lack of inheritance. It was about recognition. In his mind, his parents' choices seemed to say that they cared more about the world's perception of them and their legacy than they did about their own flesh and blood. The words they had once spoken about empathy, kindness, and family unity seemed hollow in the face of what felt like abandonment. Jake's pain wasn't rooted in material loss, but in the emotional void left by the absence of his parents' understanding. The legacy they had left behind wasn't just one of wealth, it was one of values. And in that moment, Jake felt as though those values had been withdrawn from him, leaving him to grapple with a confusing and painful truth. Roy, equally devastated, shared in her brother's feelings, though her response was quieter, more reserved. Both siblings, despite their differing personalities, understood that this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about something far deeper: identity, love, and their place in the family narrative. With no clear answers to their questions, they soon turned to legal counsel, seeking clarity and perhaps a way to make sense of this monumental shift in their lives. Thus began a fierce legal battle, one that would drag the Reiner name into the public spotlight in ways they had never expected. The family's once private matters, carefully protected from the world, began to unravel. As the legal drama unfolded, every detail of the Reiner family's grief, frustration, and emotional turmoil was thrust into the media, revealing a side of their lives that had always been kept hidden behind closed doors. What followed was not just a fight for money. It was a battle for their parents' legacy and their place within it. In the weeks that followed Rob's death, the family was finally able to lay their parents to rest, but not until the necessary procedures and examinations were completed. The Los Angeles coroner, who had been involved in the post-mortem process, dictated the timing of the funeral, pushing the family's mourning period to an emotional breaking point. The pain of losing their parents was compounded by the delays and legal processes, leaving Jake and Roy in a state of limbo, unable to fully grieve as they tried to navigate the complicated logistics of handling their parents' affairs. On December 19, 2025, nearly 2 weeks after the devastating loss, Jake was officially listed as the informant on both death certificates. He was entrusted with the responsibility of receiving his parents' ashes, a deeply personal role that added another layer of complexity to his grief. The cremation took place at Mount Sinai Mortuary in the Hollywood Hills, a respected Jewish funeral home that had long been associated with some of Hollywood's most beloved figures. This site, rich with history and significance within the Jewish community, offered a sense of respect and tradition, as it emphasized swift yet dignified funeral arrangements. The funeral service was intimate and quiet, a far cry from the flashy and public displays of mourning often seen in Hollywood. There were no cameras, no crowds, no spectacles, just a small circle of loved ones who gathered to say goodbye. The quiet solitude of the ceremony was a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted around the Reiner family in the wake of their parents' deaths. But even this small moment of peace did not last long. In a deeply personal and intimate decision, Jake took the ashes home, keeping them close during the darkest days of mourning. The ashes of his parents, once so full of life, now became a physical manifestation of the void they had left behind. Yet even as Jake and Roy tried to process their grief in private, the questions about their parents' final wishes and the decision to leave nothing to them continued to haunt them. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on them, and they soon realized that their parents had made decisions that would forever alter their relationship with them. There was still one unresolved question: where would their parents be laid to rest? No final resting place had been chosen yet, and the uncertainty left Jake and Roy in a state of emotional unrest. Whispers among family members suggested that the ashes might one day be scattered in a place of personal meaning, perhaps a location where their parents had shared happy memories or a place that held deep significance to the family. Alternatively, some speculated that the ashes might eventually be placed in a family cemetery, a place where their parents could rest among their ancestors. Whatever the final decision was, the question remained unresolved, a painful reminder of the unfinished chapter in their parents' lives. In the midst of the overwhelming sorrow, Roy and Jake made a choice that reflected both their pain and respect for their parents. They decided to handle everything quietly without the intrusive gaze of the public eye. No cameras, no crowds, no spectacle. Only a small circle of loved ones, standing closely, offering what little support they could in the silence of their shared grief. It was a decision that honored the private nature of their mourning, one that allowed them to process their loss without the constant scrutiny of the world around them. In a deeply personal and intimate move, the ashes of their parents were brought back to Jake's home, a place that now felt like the last tie to the lives they had once shared. Keeping their parents close during the darkest days of mourning, the ashes became a symbol of both love and loss. Although no final resting place had been decided, whispers began to circulate about the possibility that one day, the ashes might be scattered in a location that held personal meaning, perhaps a place that had been significant to their parents in life, or perhaps in a family cemetery, where their legacy could rest alongside those who came before them. But even these fleeting moments of quiet peace were short-lived, as life, with its relentless pull, soon beckoned the family back to the public eye. Just days later, the world turned its gaze once more upon the Reiner family. Major media outlets, ever eager for the next big story, caught sight of Roy and Jake stepping into one of Beverly Hills' most prestigious law firms, renowned for handling Hollywood inheritance disputes. Dressed in dark, somber clothing, their faces pale and drawn with the weight of grief, they entered the firm, their movements deliberate, their expressions weary. The media, relentless as always, seized the moment. Cameras flashed and photographers shouted questions, their voices drowning out the silence that hung in the air between the siblings. The images of the grieving children quickly spread across news outlets, accompanied by bold, intrusive headlines about a $200 million inheritance battle. The speculation that followed was rampant. Why had lawyers been brought in so soon? Was the will even validated yet? Who would manage the vast estate? While these questions echoed through the media like hollow noise, they missed the deeper human reality of the moment. These were not ruthless heirs plotting to seize control of their parents' wealth. They were children, still reeling from the loss of the people who had given them life, shaped their values, and loved them unconditionally. Yet, the media chose to ignore the raw emotion in favor of sensational headlines. They failed to see that Roy and Jake were not seeking power or wealth. They were simply two people in mourning, trying to make sense of a world that had just turned upside down. The pressure of the public gaze grew unbearable, its weight suffocating as the siblings faced constant media scrutiny. And then, just when it seemed the situation couldn't become any more intense, a shocking revelation emerged. A trusted family source confirmed what had been rumored. Rob had already made arrangements for nearly his entire $200 million fortune to be directed toward charitable foundations. At first, the news spread quietly, with little fanfare. But when it hit, it resonated deeply with those who had followed Rob's life and his work. It was a decision rooted in a core belief that Rob had carried with him for years, a belief that children should stand on their own, that they should not be given everything on a silver platter, but rather should earn their place in the world. Rob had always believed that inherited wealth could diminish a person's ambition, dull their sense of purpose, and leave them relying on something external to fuel their drive. It was not a punishment, it was a philosophy, one that he had lived by for decades. This belief was something Rob had often discussed with his children, urging them to build their own paths, to create their own futures without the cushion of inherited wealth. He believed that wealth, when given too freely, could actually hinder growth, stunting the development of character and ambition. In his mind, giving too much to his children would deprive them of the lessons they needed to learn on their own, to fight, to work, to strive for success, and to understand the consequences of their actions. With Nick, who had faced his own personal struggles, Rob had been particularly cautious. He believed that offering too much comfort could be a disservice to Nick, delaying his growth. Rob's decision to allow Nick to face his struggles was rooted in the belief that real growth came from confronting life's challenges, not from being shielded from them. The idea of protecting Nick forever, of providing him with endless comfort, would, in Rob's mind, only prolong the inevitable, growth through experience, hardship, and self-reliance. When it came to Jake and Roy, Rob saw two independent individuals. He admired the lives they had built for themselves. Jake had established a steady career, a life that was his own, separate from his parents. Roy, too, had carved out her own path, deeply immersed in her creative work, building something meaningful from the ground up. Rob trusted them both to continue moving forward, believing that they were stronger than anyone realized. For Rob, success wasn't about leaving behind wealth. It wasn't about whether his children would be financially secure after his passing. It was about whether they could continue to live with purpose, to create their own futures, and to make their own decisions, free from the constraints of inherited wealth. He believed that his children were capable of standing on their own 2 feet, of continuing to grow and evolve without the safety net of his fortune. It was a belief that came from a place of love, a love that, in his mind, had to be tough and real. Jake and Roy, though, felt the sting of this decision deeply. What Rob had intended as an act of love, as a final gesture to push them toward self-reliance, now felt like a sharp betrayal. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the loss of a bond they had thought was unbreakable, about feeling pushed aside in favor of an ideal that, at the time, seemed cold and distant. Their father, in his attempt to teach them independence, had unknowingly created a wound that would take years to heal. In the days that followed, as the media frenzy continued to escalate, Roy and Jake were forced to reconcile their father's decisions with the pain they were feeling. The battle they were about to enter wasn't just about legal claims or financial disputes. It was about understanding a father's love that, while meant to push them forward, had instead left them grappling with a legacy that now felt disconnected from their own lives. It was a collision of ideals, Rob's belief in independence and self-reliance against the raw emotional need for familial love and recognition. The journey ahead would be long, complicated, and filled with uncertainty. But through it all, one thing remained clear. The Reiner family, despite their differences, were bound by more than just wealth. They were bound by the love, values, and principles that Rob had instilled in them, even if those values now seemed at odds with their grief. The inheritance battle, now unfolding in the public eye, was a reflection not just of financial stakes, but of the emotional cost of legacy, of what it truly means to leave behind something of value. For Rob, success had never been defined by the material wealth left behind. The tangible fortune of $200 million wasn't what he saw as the ultimate measure of his life's work. To him, success was about legacy, about ensuring that his children could live with purpose, create their own futures, and find fulfillment without relying on inherited wealth. This belief was deeply ingrained in his philosophy, one he had carried with him throughout his life. The wealth he had accumulated, the empire he had built, was never intended to be a cushion for his children's lives. Instead, he viewed it as a resource to support causes that would have a lasting, positive impact on society. This conviction was reflected in the choices he made long before his death. Rob made his intentions clear to those closest to him. Nearly all of his $200 million fortune was to be allocated to charitable causes, ensuring that the money would continue to work for society long after he was gone. For Rob, charity was not about grandeur or prestige. It was about making a difference. He strongly believed that leaving a fortune to his children would deprive them of the opportunity to grow and develop their own sense of purpose and ambition. Too much inherited wealth, in his view, could dampen the drive to create, to build, and to live a life of self-sufficiency. Rob didn't simply talk about these ideals, he lived them. His actions were aligned with his words. He made the difficult decision that Roy, his daughter, would be responsible for selling the family's Brentwood home, one of their most treasured possessions, along with other properties. The proceeds were to be directed toward the charitable causes he and his wife, Michelle, had championed for years. It wasn't just about donating money. It was about creating lasting societal change, ensuring that his legacy would live on in ways that transcended personal wealth. In Rob's eyes, leaving his children a fortune wasn't an act of love. It was an act of disservice. He wanted them to live freely without the safety net of inherited wealth. He had often told them that they needed to walk their own paths and make their own decisions. He didn't want them to feel entitled to his success, but to understand the value of hard work, struggle, and the lessons life would offer. He often repeated the sentiment that parents weren't meant to build a smooth road for their children, but rather to teach them how to navigate the rough terrain of life. It was a philosophy grounded in the idea that struggle was essential for growth. Without it, success would lose its meaning. In one conversation, a family friend recalled Rob saying, "Parents aren't here to build the road for their kids, they're here to teach them how to walk on their own." These words, spoken years before his passing, were a reflection of Rob's core belief that the greatest gift a parent could give was independence. He knew that this might cause pain for his children. He understood the emotional cost of his decision, but he trusted that with time they would come to understand the reasoning behind it. Yet, when the will was revealed, it was a moment of profound shock and pain for Jake and Roy. It wasn't simply a legal document to them. It was a reflection of their father's final choice, a choice that left them feeling not just heartbroken, but erased. The realization that they were not the beneficiaries of their father's fortune hit them like a physical blow. They had believed that, after his passing, they would inherit something meaningful, something that would keep them connected to the life they had shared with Rob and Michelle. Instead, they were left with nothing, not even a token of their father's wealth. This wasn't just about material loss. It was the emotional devastation of feeling discarded, forgotten in favor of an ideal that didn't take into account the personal ties they had to their parents' legacy. They had been taught to live with integrity, empathy, and compassion, and now it felt as though that very legacy had been taken from them. The wealth that could have provided them with security, comfort, and a sense of continuity was gone, diverted instead toward public causes that, while noble, didn't include them. It wasn't just a financial blow. It was a painful rejection of their place in the family history. Behind closed doors, in the privacy of a Beverly Hills law office, Jake and Roy confronted the reality of their situation. The weight of their emotions was palpable, each sibling struggling to process the depth of what had just been revealed. Roy, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her grief, broke down, her voice trembling as she said, "This isn't fair." It wasn't just the legalities that hurt her. It was the overwhelming sense of betrayal, the feeling that her parents' love and legacy had been given to everyone but her. Jake's response, however, was more raw, more visceral. "They chose to care for the world but forgot us," he allegedly said. His words weren't about greed or entitlement. They were a reflection of deep emotional pain. Jake's anger wasn't at the charity itself, but at the feeling of being erased from his own family's narrative. It wasn't just about the absence of money. It was about the absence of acknowledgement. The feeling that, in the final act of their parents' lives, they had been left behind. In that moment, their grief began to take on a new form: resistance. They didn't just want to understand why their father had made the decision to leave them with nothing. They needed to reclaim their place in his story. They weren't just fighting for money. They were fighting for their legacy, for their connection to Rob and Michelle. Determined to find a way to restore what they felt had been taken from them, Jake and Roy began to explore every legal avenue available to them. They pored over timelines, trust documents, and the clauses in the will, searching for any opportunity to challenge what had been decided. They soon assembled a team of legal experts, attorneys known for their success in Hollywood inheritance disputes. Their first meeting was tense. One of the lawyers, aware of the emotional stakes, told them frankly, "If you want fairness, this will be long and brutal." But Jake, resolute and unyielding, looked at his lawyer and responded with unwavering strength. "We're not afraid. We've already lost everything." From that moment on, their strategy began to take shape. They would challenge the charitable foundations directly, arguing that these foundations had stripped them of any meaningful connection to their parents' legacy. It wasn't about claiming a portion of the inheritance. It was about restoring the sense of identity and family they believed had been lost in the process. For Jake and Roy, this fight wasn't about wealth. It was about ensuring their place in their family's history, a history they felt had been erased. Roy, who had been quieter than Jake throughout this ordeal, still showed her own form of resolve. "I don't want a portion," she reportedly said, her voice firm. "I want it all. They're gone and we're left with nothing." She wasn't just fighting for money, she was fighting for the recognition of their family's legacy. Despite the warnings from their legal team that challenging public charities could permanently damage their parents' public image, Jake remained steadfast. "Public opinion isn't my family," he declared, a sentiment that underscored the emotional conflict driving them. This battle wasn't just about legal documents or financial stakes. It was about legacy, about the meaning of their father's decisions, and what those decisions said about their place in his life. For Jake and Roy, this wasn't about acquiring a share of the fortune. It was about understanding why Rob had made the choices he did. They wanted to reconcile his decision with the love they had always felt from him, and to ensure that his final gesture wasn't one of erasure, but of love. Rob's legacy was complex. He had built an empire not just financially, but intellectually and socially. Through his films, his philanthropy, and his advocacy, he had left an indelible mark on the world. His wealth was a reflection of his creativity and hard work, but it was also a reflection of his commitment to social causes. He had shaped public policy, promoted human rights, and been a champion for equality. For Rob, success was never about the accumulation of wealth. It was about making the world a better place. But for Jake and Roy, the inheritance that was a byproduct of their father's success became a symbol of deep emotional pain. When the will was revealed, it felt like a bombshell had exploded in their lives. The wealth that had been created through Rob's tireless work and passion was not being passed on to them. Instead, it was being directed toward the causes he had always championed, causes that, while meaningful, didn't include them. To the outside world, it seemed like the highest form of generosity. To his children, it felt like abandonment, a final gesture that left them questioning their place in their father's life and legacy. Did Rob truly believe that leaving nothing behind was the best way to teach his children independence? Or had years of emotional separation between him and his children shaped a decision that no amount of money could ever fix? These questions linger, unresolved. They hang between compassion and heartbreak, as Jake and Roy struggle to make sense of a decision that has left them not only questioning their father's love, but also their place in the world he created. The battle to reclaim their inheritance had become much more than a legal dispute. It had become a fight to understand their father's legacy, a legacy that now seemed uncertain, fragmented, and painfully out of reach. So, what do you think? Was Rob's decision truly about teaching his children independence, or was it a decision born out of years of emotional distance? Would you have fought for your place in the family's legacy, or would you have respected your parents' final wish? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your opinions. And if you're hooked on this incredible journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. The battle for legacy, love, and family isn't over yet. Stay tuned for the next chapter.